Welcome to the Space Setup News live stream. I do this live stream same time every week, and I recap over the videos I've done this week, talk about them, and bring up some comments from people about the videos. So we have Marty in the house already, so thanks for joining, Marty. Good morning from Australia. And so let's get into the first video I did this week, which was on Gitai. And if you're not familiar with Gitai, they're a Japanese company, or at least they started in Japan, in Tokyo. They've now moved their office to Torrance, in the United States. And we have Wayne in the house. Hi, Wayne. So they're basically a robotics company. They work on robots for the International Space Station, for lunar rovers, and so on. What they want to do is reduce the cost of labor by a factor of 100. Astronauts are quite expensive. NASA's charging $100,000 per hour for one of their astronauts to work on private activities on the International Space Station. Gitai thinks that they can reduce that cost by a factor of 100. The robotic arms are useful for life extension missions on satellites, orbital debris removal, or assembly of large structures in space. So for trusses for space solar power satellites, or any kind of construction you want on a commercial space station, putting scientific experiments outside, catching satellites or cargo or crew capsules. You want a big robotic arm. You can see the arm here. It's articulated. This one's quite long. I think it's like 10 meters. And you can see this interface here. That's how it connects to the station. And wherever you have one of these interfaces, the arm can move. So it can move its way around, as you can see there. So you just put the interfaces on, and it can just move around the space station, or around a lander, or a rover. So it's very, very flexible and useful like that. And I think I have another one here, another video. Bring that up. So you can put different end effects on here. You've got some kind of cutting tool, and here it's just cutting like a defunct lander, and it can cut it. And then you've got another arm that can hold the piece that's been cut, and then it can be removed. So this is disassembling a lander, which the scrap metal can then be used to make something new using a metal foundry. So yeah, Wayne said it's a neat system. It is. So yeah, so I'll go back to my notes here. So cost of labor reduced by 100. You can use it in space for what's called the ISAM market, which is in situ assembly and manufacturing. So any large structures in space, you're going to need robots. You can't use astronauts. They're just too expensive, and it's too risky for astronauts to be exposed outside for a long period of time with so much debris in space. And the situation is getting worse with debris. There's more and more defunct upper stages just drifting around in space. And then you've got two of them knocking into each other. Then you've got lots of small debris clouds. So the situation is not good, and you don't really want astronauts in that kind of environment. So it makes a lot of sense to use robots. They're also working with JAXA, the Japanese Space Agency, on the Toyota Lunar cruiser, which is a pressurized lunar cruiser. And they'll be working on the robotic arm, which means that it can be used in uncrewed missions, or it can help the crew with tasks like picking up something or moving something around. And also, as you saw, there's would be great. Marty's saying would be great in LEO dismantling dead satellites. Yes, for orbital debris removal. Oh yeah, you could cut up all the metal, whatever, and then use it for an in-space metal foundry. It could be used for that as well. And here's an example. It could be used on a lander. And Wayne's saying T-Finer could be used for orbital debris removal. T-Finer is kind of like a radioactive sheet that can produce a lot of thrust over time. So you can see here the arm is attached to the lander, but if a rover was to back up to the lander, the arm could then move onto the rover. As long as you've got these attachment points, it can move around, which is amazing. And there's another, I think I've got another photo here. Bring it up. So here, in addition to the arm, that single arm, you can have dual arms. So here's the Lunar rover, and you can see it's got dual arms, so it can actually manipulate things. It can hold things, it can move them around, it can pick things up. So it can do things that other rovers can't do. And here's a photo of it being used actually on the International Space Station. So this is a real photo, it's not a render, and you can see the dual arms, you can see how it's articulated, and yeah, it's being used in space, on the International Space Station. So it's very, very flexible. And it's TRL level 7, which means that it's actually being used in the space environment. They've got no commercial missions yet, but they're flying again in 2026, and they're getting closer to be able to do commercial missions. And this is what they propose to DARPA for what they call RAS, which is Robotics as a Service. So you just hire the robot for however long you need it for a mission, and it can help you on the lunar surface. So here you can see the lander, the rover cutting up a lander, and then it sends it to this metal foundry on the moon from Cislunar Industries. So it can be used for scavenging scrap metal. Here it's being used like from the space starship. It's being used for whatever, I'm not exactly sure what it's doing there. And here you've got it building a communications tower. And I actually have a photo of that here. So these are just component sections, and it can basically stack them up. And on the side, it's got these interface connectors, so it can move up. It can move up. You can see there's two arms at the top. Place the next one, go down, get the next one, go back up, place it on top, and you can build a communications array, which I think they're going to demo on the moon at some point, which is cool. And here's another photo here. This is like a mock-up of a space station, and you can see these interface sections, and it just can basically move around. Yeah, renting robots makes a lot of sense. So Wayne's saying that I used to rent forklifts to businesses, and now you can rent robotic arms. One of the things in the field guide, the DARPA field guide, which is the next video, is I done one chapter on, I did a chapter on lunar power, but they do have a chapter, I think, on robotics as a service. So I may do that as a separate video because it makes a lot of sense, really. So yes, there's another video here. So this has got some kind of drill section here. You've got two robots. So you could drill down into the ground, and then the other robot could put something in the ground, like some kind of sensor. So it's very flexible, and yeah. So that's Gitai. So let's get on to the comments, see what people had to say about this video. So we have Iron Drive 3D saying, I think sci-fi has led us down. I never saw or read any sci-fi story with inchworm arms like that. To be fair, there's tons I haven't read. Those things are awesome. So it's pretty interesting, like the fact you can just move around. Move all over a space station as long as you've got the interface adapters. Yes, and Wayne saying that the robotics as a service would be a good topic. Yeah, there's a whole chapter on the field guide. So I'm probably going to go through a lot of the different chapters. So Jim Watchman saying, I was thinking of my vision of robots building human habitat in orbit. Before 2100, the human population will explode because of abundance. We will have AI robotics everywhere getting things done, not by next week or tomorrow, but when we ask. I have commented about protection cylinders with layers of 1G habitats orbiting Earth at the Lagrange points where people retire so that they choose to live at a lower gravity and feel free of the restraints of 1G. We need swarms of robots building stuff on orbit so that the human race can expand throughout the solar system. Well, this is one of the first steps. We will need AI robotics to live off Earth. Yeah, I think we're gradually expanding out into low Earth orbit, then around the moon, then landing on the moon, and then going to Mars. So gradually moving out. And as we do, we build all of the technology. We'll build the robots, the space stations. We'll build all the communications, and we'll build the assembled structures in space, space solar satellites, metal foundries, and yeah. And he does mention about the Lagrange points. There's 5 of them. I do have somewhere. I do have like it's not quite a script yet, but an idea for talking about Lagrange points, because there was some study I saw about having stations at Lagrange points, and the certain advantages. Station keeping is not really a problem. It's kind of like a balance point between Earth and the moon. So if you put something there, it kind of stays there without a lot of effort. So I do have, I think it's a study or a report on that. So I may do a video on that. He's just reminded me. And then Wingsley saying, Gitai looks very promising from a distance. Let's hope they get their shot and succeed. Yeah, well, they're flying to the ISS, I think, in 2026. And hopefully they get to do some commercial missions. It's a very interesting topic. So let's then move on to the second video of this week, which is me starting to look at the title, I think, is Commercial Lunar Economy, something, powering the lunar economy anyway. And it's a field guide by DARPA, which is the Defense Advanced Research something agency. Defense Advanced Research, I can't remember what the P stands for, but basically it's a US government focused on defense, but they're working on how to get to a commercial lunar economy by 2035. So they make the statement, 2035, there's a thriving lunar economy. How did we get here? And they had 13 companies, commercial companies, propose how they could establish a thriving lunar economy by 2035 and how they'd work together. So it's not about competition. It's about how do all these companies cooperate and work together to enable a lunar economy. So the report is very big, but I'm just going to I concentrated on this video just on lunar power. So first of all, they make the case that it's off-board versus on-board. Right now, all the power for any lunar asset is on board. Whatever the system is that lands, it has all the power, and the power generation comes for like a lunar lander or a rover. It will have a battery, it will have solar panels. So all that is mass, all that is volume, just for power generation, which means you have less mass for scientific payloads, for whatever you want to do on the moon. So the idea is you've got to move it from on-board to off-board. You just need something you can plug in and you have power. You have all the power you need and you have power 24/7. And Mr. Surfer Doug says, hello, just found and subscribed to your channel. Interesting content. Thank you very much. And thank you for joining the live stream, finding the live stream. So lunar power. So off-board, and it has to be available 24/7, which is a problem on the moon because 14 days there's no sun and it's extremely cold. So nearly everything you put on the moon will die when the sun goes down. So that has to be fixed. Power has to be cheap, it has to be resilient, and it has to be abundant. And I'll just remove myself for the moment on here. Where I am. Oh, okay. A mix of diverse power generation systems needed must be networked with energy storage for backup. Yeah, so I'll just full screen here. So it can't be just one power system. For instance, you can't just have solar because it doesn't work half the time. So you need a mix. So the question is, what should that mix be? And let's see if I have more notes here. Okay, so the first thing I talk about is, here it is beamed power, beamed optical power. So here you can see a mast, and here's a rover, and basically it can just beam the power to the rover, and this works over kilometers. So obviously the further the beam goes, the beam kind of diverges, it gets a bit wider. But it works over distances of 20 kilometers. And I think the beam would then be about 30 centimeters wide. But still you get quite a bit of power. It can even go distances of 100 kilometers, but obviously the beam's going to get quite wide at that point. Anyway, beam power is definitely a good option to use. And here's an example. This is actually, I think, Volta space. So you can see a rover and you've got this optical receiver on the front. And if you beam power onto this optical receiver, it powers the rover, which is a pretty awesome idea. Okay, this is what I want to, yeah. So power systems for the lunar economy, and I can stick myself in the corner again. So optical wireless beaming, the advantages are long distance, simple. There's no cables you need to lay. Just put the mast up and you can beam power. Problem is it's pretty low efficiency, 15 to 25% typically. So, you know, pros and cons. Wired power, and we have a little, I think we have a photo here. So you can see, this is astrobotic. So you can see the lander, there's a rover, and it's laying this cable here. So you want to lay high voltage cables so you don't lose a lot of power. You just like meters, hundreds of meters or kilometers of wired power. This is highly efficient. You can get 85, 90%. So you don't lose any power really. But the downside is you have to get the copper from Earth. You can't really get a lot of copper from the moon. So if you've got kilometers of wired cables, then that's be quite heavy. The alternative is you could use locally sourced aluminium. There's plenty of aluminium on the moon, but you'd need a metal foundry. You'd have to make the cables, and it's not quite as good as copper. But I mean, if you can make aluminium cables, I think you'd use aluminium cables, to be honest. And then we have solar power. That wasn't discussed in the report, but I think the reason is it's mature technology. DARPA doesn't need to talk about it. It's very simple. And it's cheap to use. So practically all the missions to the moon use solar power. And you can see here Astrobotic with their what they call VSATs, or vertical solar array towers. So these are very tall. They have to be because when you're in the South Pole, the sun gets maybe 1 or 2 degrees above the horizon. It's very, very, very low. So unless your towers are quite tall, they won't see the sun. They won't get any power from the sun, so they have to be vertically very tall. And you basically land these towers and then connect them together, and you have. So this is an example of like a power grid. You've got all these VSATs, and then you've got cables connecting them all together. And here's another one, and yeah, this is what it looks like. So Astrobotic are working on their. They're working on their lunar grid, as they call it. It's basically a lot of these VSATs connected together with high voltage copper cables, and you've got yourself a grid. And lunar grid light, I think, is going to be demoed on the moon, maybe 2027, something like that. And Tobin started saying, what technologies are enabling systems to survive the lunar nights? Nuclear, but there's something else. How much of a system really needs to be kept warm? So good question, and we have the answer. And Marty is saying the need for copper fits in with the need to dismantle and use old landers. Yeah, potentially old landers will have some copper. But the answer to lunar night, I think, is what you're looking at on the screen now. And this is a nuclear battery. So all it is some kind of radioactive material. In this case, it would be from Xeno power, it would be strontium-90. And it just generates a lot of radioactive, I think it's alpha particles. So it constantly gives out alpha particles that are hitting the case and warming up the case. So it generates thermal heat. That's all it does. It's a heater. And if you have it in a rover or a lander during the lunar night, the thermal heat will keep it warm enough that it doesn't freeze. You can also turn it into an RTG, which is a radio isotope thermoelectric generator, and that will generate a small amount of electricity. It's about 5 to 7%, but it's enough for like telemetry, so you can ping the rover to make sure it's alive. You can't do much else, but at least the rover will survive the lunar night and revive itself during the day. And I have a graphic here explaining the situation. So this is from the report. So basically, you'd think maybe you could use a rover 50% of the time. Like it can operate during the day, at night it goes to sleep, and then you revive during the day. But it's actually 40% if you look at the graph here. That is because when the sun comes back up, first of all, like it comes up slowly, and then you have to charge the batteries. So until the batteries are fully charged and all the components have warmed up to operating temperature, you can't resume operations. So it turns out, if you do the calculations, it's 40% of the time, which is obviously useless. If you want a thriving lunar economy, you can't just operate 40% of the time. So you need 24/7 power on the moon. Yeah, and this is a graphic about the optical beam power. Basically, you've got the power and then you've got the range. And obviously, the further you go, the less power you get because the beam diverges. So, okay, yes, and back on to Xeno power and nuclear batteries. They're using them, you can use them on satellites, and you can use them on rovers. So yes, that's RTGs, nuclear batteries, to keep lunar assets alive during the night. But obviously, you'd want to use nuclear power as well. Nuclear power would give you a large amount of power, 24/7. You could put nuclear reactors in craters to power mining operations. You can put one quite near the base, not too near the base because it's a nuclear reactor, and you'd power the entire base. And the advantage of nuclear power is that there's a keep out zone. You have a large zone around the nuclear reactor, and you can say to everyone else, keep out, I've got a nuclear reactor, it's not safe. Which is great if you want to keep the Chinese or the Russians away from an area. You just put a nuclear reactor there, and you've got a keep out zone. So that's why I think the US government wants a nuclear reactor by 2030. Is they're going to put it near Shackleton crater, and then the Russians and the Chinese can't enter that zone. So it's geopolitics rather than for the moon, but it's still very, very useful for NASA. And if we have a look at the VSATs, this is from Astrobotic. You've got one that's 70 meters tall, and then you've got a massive 25-meter tall VSAT that can produce 50 kilowatts of power. And Honeybee Robotics has a 100-meter mast that can generate 100 kilowatts of power, which is just an amazing amount of power. And this is what it looks like. So basically, it's got a rover, so you can move it around, station it somewhere, and then just roll out the solar panels. And some of these systems are actually can be stowed. It can roll back down again, move it somewhere else. So it's a very, very useful system. And the one thing I need to talk about as well is the power grids. So Astrobotic are working on their Lunar Grid power grid, and there's also a company that I've done a video on in the past called Orbital Mining Corporation. They're also working on a power grid. So they're working on DC to DC microgrid. So basically, you want to keep it DC, you want to keep it high voltage, and you basically just put all these microgrids around, and basically it will provide power to all different systems, which need different voltages. It can step up and step down the voltage required. So every piece of equipment gets the voltage and current that it needs, and that's what a power grid, what you'd use it for. So that is my lunar power video. I think I've covered everything here. Yeah. So optical wireless beaming, wide power. Let's see if there's more. Okay, there's a system I have not covered. So, and that is fuel cell energy storage. So this is a closed loop system, and it works in two ways. So you provide the system with water, then during the day, solar power, excess solar power, is used to split the water into hydrogen and oxygen as gases, and you store the gases at high pressure. And then during the lunar night, when there's no solar power, you can reverse the process, combine the hydrogen and oxygen back into water, which generates electricity. So you have electricity during the lunar night. And then during the day, you reverse it again, split, combine, you keep doing that. And basically, you can use it as energy storage. So Honda is working on this kind of system. They have these kind of systems on Earth, so they're providing a system for the moon, and they've just combined with Astrobotic for their lunar grid system. So you'll have the vertical solar arrays, you'll have the lunar grid from Astrobotic, and you'll have the fuel cell system from Honda combined. Gives you 24/7 power on the moon, which is pretty awesome. Nuclear batteries, RTGs, and also Stirling radioisotope thermal generators. So they're a bit more complicated, but they produce 5 to 20%, or like 15 to 20% efficiency. So nuclear, that's another way. And then of course you've got nuclear power. Scales from kilowatts to gigawatts. Base load energy, 24/7, enables commercial mining on the moon. And then the power grids, Astrobotic, lunar grid, deploying 500 meters of ultralight cable and transmit 1 kilowatt of power on the moon. Flight ready system by second quarter of 2026. And then Orbital Mining Corporation is DC to DC microgrid, 98% efficient, they're claiming, and $8,000 for 2 systems of 2 kilowatt systems. So that's awesome. And yes, talking about nuclear powered rovers, you can see here at the front is a Xenopower battery, and that basically will power, I don't think it powers the system, but it keeps it warm enough that it doesn't freeze over the lunar night. So this is going to be an iSpace robot. iSpace and Xenopower are combined, are going to work on future lunar missions, and that means iSpace lunar landers and rovers will have a nuclear battery on board, so they can survive the lunar night, which is amazing. So I think I've covered all the power systems there. So let's see what people are saying about this. Put myself in the corner. So Marty's saying the integration of these various systems sounds like the best way to lessen the chance of a mission ending catastrophic failure. I look forward to hearing more about this paper. So yeah, you want diverse systems, not just one. You want RTGs, you want nuclear power, you want solar, you want fuel cell, you want wired power, you want optical beaming, and connect them all together, network them all together with some kind of power grid system, and you've got fail-safe, resilient, reliable, abundant power on the moon, which is what you need for a lunar economy. And yeah, there's a lot more in the field guide, so I'll be going over the different chapters. But power is the obvious one to start with, because without power, you can't do anything. So Wayne's World is saying they do make fascinating reading. There's been a lot of thought put into it by some very clever people. Yep. These are commercial companies that have worked on the field guide. So they're building systems. They know what's practical, what can be done, and how much it's going to cost, which is what you want. You don't want the academics. You want the commercial people who are actually building systems. And Wingsley's saying, thanks for providing the link to the DARPA study. If something like this actually comes to fruition, that could be a significant bellwether for major progress on the moon. Still, the most important indicator will be space-based solar power. So the study did look into solar power for the moon, and it turns out it's technically feasible. They know how to do it. It's just be too expensive. The mass of the equipment needed would just not make it commercially viable at the moment. Maybe in the future that will change. But beaming down solar energy to the moon, they don't think is commercially viable. And we have Kako Genesis saying, not considering fission in this doesn't really make any sense. It is kind of weird to me. Where am I? It is kind of weird that the study didn't really include nuclear power. The reasons they give is it won't be available in 2040, which we know is not the case anymore, because the US government definitely wants to put a nuclear reactor on the moon by 2030 of at least 100 kilowatts, and hopefully more. And there could even be more than one contract. We don't know how many contracts there's going to be, but certainly you can see 2 or 3 companies bidding for a contract for nuclear power. We already know Lockheed Martin has worked on these systems. There's potentially Rolls-Royce. There's BXWT. There's like Antares. You could name probably 4 or 5 or more companies that could work on nuclear reactors. So hopefully we get not just one, we get 2 or 3, and we get more than 100 kilowatts. Because the Chinese, with their International Lunar Research Station, are thinking megawatt class nuclear reactor for their lunar research station. So 100 kilowatts is kind of quite small. You can't do mining operations with 100 kilowatts. You're going to need megawatt. In fact, for commercial mining, you need gigawatt nuclear reactors. But 100 kilowatts is where you can start, right? And then get bigger. So yes, I think that is everything I want to cover this week. So thank you for watching the live stream. I do this every single week, and hopefully I'll see you next time. Thank you for joining.